That looks good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to our weekly satsang. Just checking to make sure we're okay here. Looks like it's working fine. I apologize for suddenly canceling last week's satsang. Yeah, there's little small health issues. I'm fine. We'll continue today. Got quite a few more questions in addition to the questions that I didn't answer from last week. So there's quite a few questions here. I apologize in advance if I don't get to your question. We'll do the best possible. Also, sometimes an email will include several questions, and I might only take one of those questions, just so that we can respond to more people. So our first question for today comes from Uma, who lives in Chicago. Uma begins, one of the central tenets of Vedanta is ahimsa, which is cause no harm. And thank you, Uma, for not saying non-violence. Cause no harm is a much better translation. But she refers now to an incident in the Mahabharata where Draupadi is disrobed by Dushasana, and then sitting there, Bhishma and Drona and Kripa, the family elders, just sit there watching without interfering, without stopping Dushasana from disrobing her in this way. Of course, to disrobe a woman in public, especially in ancient times, was as horrible as any kind of abuse could be. So Uma asks, why she says, how is it that they remain completely silent? Isn't this a worst example of adharma? Can you help me understand why they chose to remain silent as this heinous act was committed? And it was absolutely a terrible act, and in fact, Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa and others should have intervened and didn't. The fact that they didn't intervene is absolutely evidence of adharma. If you ask why didn't they intervene, that has a lot to do with the complexity of the story. Their allegiance to King Dhritarashtra, their allegiance to the Kaurava family. Bhishma also had a further complication of having taken vows as a child to support whoever is the king, in this case Dhritarashtra. So there was a lot of other factors involved, leading to what we commonly call dharma sankata, a conflict with regard to dharma. In English, maybe competing interests, it could be called. And that's something we all deal with, is competing interest. When the main interest is spiritual growth, then you put following dharma foremost, in the first position. But when your primary commitment is not to following dharma, when your primary commitment is not to spiritual growth, then other interests compete with dharma and can supersede dharma. This is life. Life is complicated. Lots of dharma sankata. Next question from Manuj, who lives in Bengal. How does adhyasa happen? Adhyasa means superimposition. In the Adhyasa Bhashya, Shankara's famous introduction to the Brahma Sutras, he says that I and you Yushmat asmat pratyaya yoho. We've heard that so many times. Some of it is gets stuck in your memory. That the self and non-self are ati viruddha, Shankara says. They're absolutely different, like light and dark. And Shankara concludes that because they're absolutely different, it is illogical that they should be superimposed on each other. Brahma Sutras are a highly technical text, and here Manuja's asking about this highly technical text. Let me try to respond, maybe not in such a scholarly manner. His final part here, we still say adhyasa happens as it's in our daily experience. And he's actually paraphrasing the opening statement of Shankara's adhyasa bhasha. How does adhyasa happen? The classic example we give for adhyasa is the rope snake. When you're walking down a dark alley and you see the snake, how does that happen? And we can make it very complicated, or we can make it very simple. Here's the simple version. You see the snake because you don't see the rope. The rope is obscured from your vision by the darkness or semi-darkness of the alley, and that darkness of the alley represents ignorance, avidya. And it is, in fact, a kind of avidya, ignorance. Your non-recognition of the rope is ignorance. So, in response to Manuja's question, how does adhyasa happen? The simple answer is due to avidya, ignorance. Due to ignorance of the rope, a snake is superimposed. In the same way, due to non-recognition of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, and Satchidananda Atma consciousness is present right now in your experience, but its complete nature is not recognized. So that's why we introduced this metaphor that Atma is as though covered by the veil of ignorance. That which is immediately present is not properly recognized. The rope is immediately present. It's not properly recognized. Consciousness is immediately present. It's not properly recognized. The absence of proper recognition is called ignorance, and due to ignorance comes adhyasa, superimposition. Not recognizing the rope, you superimpose a snake. Not recognizing your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, you identify with your body and mind. There's some other questions here, but I think we'll save them for another time. Next question is from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. We've had so many questions from Bangalore last week and this week. Not last week, week before. We canceled last week. Nice to know that there's so many people. How do you pronounce that? Their new pronounce Bengaluru? Bengaluru. Bengaluru. All right. Arun asks, what's the difference between What's the difference? His question is, what's the difference between deep, dreamless sleep, sushupti, and nirvikalpa samadhi? What's the difference between deep sleep and samadhi? I understand that both these states are a state of manolaya. Laya means the dissolution of the manas, and that's actually a wrong conclusion. We'll come to manolaya in just a moment. The simple answer, again, there's simple and complex answers to most of these questions. The simple answer, what's the difference between deep sleep and nirvikalpa? And the answer is nirvikalpa samadhi, you're not asleep. If you're asleep, that's not nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, in the more technical part is nirvikalpa samadhi is not a condition of manolaya. Manolaya means dissolution of the mind. The mind ends up in it's called bija avastha, a seed condition, an unmanifest condition. What's unique about the state of nirvikalpa samadhi is that the mind is fully manifest, but it's fully manifest in a highly in a unique condition, in a very special condition. And it's a condition not just of silence. Nirvikalpa samadhi is not merely silence. It's a condition of being absolutely absorbed in an unchanging thought. To explain how that comes, to be absolutely absorbed in an unchanging thought, would take a long time to explain. On the YouTube channel, I think there's a series of 4 videos on samadhi. And I think if you were to watch those videos, you'd get a fuller answer to this question. Next question. Vishwajit doesn't say where he lives. His question is about the Uddhava Gita that we've been studying here on Saturdays, and every week it's posted on our YouTube channel. So Vishwajit asks, in chapter 6 of Uddhava Gita, Sri Krishna tells Uddhava that what he is going to impart in the following chapter is secret. And then he instructs Uddhava also to keep it secret. We hear many times these secret teachings. I'm smiling because on YouTube, if you want more people to watch your video, call it secret. That's a very common trick. A lot of people publish videos and really want more people to watch their videos. So they come up with titles. The secret to this, the ultimate secret. This is secret, that's secret. Anyway, that's, what do they call that? Clickbait, where they draw you in kind of unfairly. Anyway. By the way, in Bhagavad Gita, at the end, Sri Krishna also says what I've told you, in fact, in several places in Bhagavad Gita. Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, this is secret. If it's secret, why is Sri Krishna telling it to Arjuna, and why is it told again and again in various contexts in so many texts? So obviously this idea of secret has to be understood a little bit differently. Secret doesn't mean you shouldn't tell it to others. There's a hilarious story. I'd just like to share this with you. That Ramanuja, when he was a student, the main teacher of Vishishta Advaita, a very famous teacher of Vedanta, he was given this mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, and he was told by his guru, this is a secret mantra. So having been told this is a secret mantra, what did Ramanuja do? He climbed up on the roof of a house and started shouting it out loud from the roof, the secret mantra. That really shows the idea of secret. Secret doesn't mean you shouldn't tell anyone. Secret means the Sanskrit term often used for secret is guhya, which sounds very much like guha, cave. That which is hidden away is guhya. So a secret teaching means a hidden teaching, not a teaching that shouldn't be shared. It means a hidden teaching. A hidden teaching meaning that which is so difficult to understand, difficult to grasp, That which is deep inside a cave is difficult to reach, to access. So here, these teachings are secret in that they're difficult to grasp. In fact, without a teacher, they're impossible to grasp. So here, secret or guhyam is that which is hidden, difficult to grasp, and it's not that these teachings shouldn't be shared with others. In fact, shouldn't be shared with others. In fact, there's an irony. If you, there's another side of this issue. It is indeed said that these teachings should only be taught to those who are qualified. That's also taught. That doesn't mean they're secret, but it is indeed taught that you should only impart these teachings to qualified students. Suppose you don't. Suppose you break the rule and you decide, like Ramanuja broke the rule. He went up on the roof and he shouted out loud, Om Namo Narayana. Suppose you break the rule and share these so-called secret teachings with someone who's not qualified. What is the outcome? Oddly enough, and ironically, they remain secret because when you share these teachings with someone who's not prepared, they don't get it. No harm done. Of course, it's a waste of energy, perhaps, which is why that's said. But in no sense are these teachings kind of held in such a way that they should never be imparted to others. There are indeed certain tantrika traditions with their so-called secret mantras. Fine, that is absolutely not what Sri Krishna is teaching in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Uddhava Gita. All right. Then, question from Dhyana Dasa, who lives in Brazil. And I'm thinking from the question and the name that Dhyana Dasa might be a follower of ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement, which is good. And the question is, when I read a text from Vaishnava origin, I think from Hare Krishna, saying that several authors consider Shankara to be a supporter of Buddha. Let's get the context right. Hare Krishna movement was founded by Srila Swami Prabhupada, a very pious Vaishnava teacher, and he was a prolific author. He wrote many, many, many books which are widely written, widely read, both by followers of ISKCON and by those outside of ISKCON. When you read those books, you'll find certain statements that are, a fancy word, idiosyncratic, which means they're very typical of Srila Prabhupada and his tradition. He comes from a Vaishnava tradition, a particular Vaishnava tradition known as Gaudiya Vaishnavism, a Bengali-based Vaishnava tradition that is more or less based on the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the great saint. And in his writings, in Prabhupada's writings, you'll find him criticizing Shankara for being a Bauddha, a follower of Buddha, a supporter of Buddha. And also that Shankara, not Shankara himself, but Hinduism in general, confuses Buddha with an avatara. There is a statement, I think in the Bhagavata Purana, which claims that Buddha is an avatara, one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu. It's not that Shankara said it. I think it occurs in one of the Puranas. Might not be the Bhagavata Purana, but one of the Puranas makes that statement, that Buddha is an avatara, and also that Advaita Vedanta taught by Shankara is Mayavada. It's a teaching about Maya, and everything is illusion, the world doesn't exist. Advaita is Buddhism in disguise. Can you comment on these observations? This is Prabhupada. if you want to study Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you should read his books. I don't think you'll find better instruction on Gaudiya Vaishnavism. You'll find excellent instruction in the works of Swami Prabhupada. But he was narrowly a Gaudiya Vaishnava, which means highly sectarian. That's not a criticism, it's just an observation. You can be highly sectarian. You can accuse me of being highly sectarian. I teach Advaita Vedanta, and that's just what it is. So just like I am focused on Advaita Vedanta, Srila Prabhupada is focused on his Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, and in that tradition, they consider Shankara's teachings to be harmful. They misunderstand Shankara and consider Shankara to be against bhakti, against devotion. And those of you who know the teachings of Shankara, you know that in no way whatsoever is he against bhakti, against devotion, but that's how it gets interpreted in this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. But as a result of this misinterpretation, Shankara is strongly criticized by Srila Prabhupada and many in his tradition. So let's say it is criticism of a sectarian nature. It is criticism meant to help followers stay deeply entrenched in their own tradition and not wander away to the teachings of Shankara. So not uncommon to see that. Okay. Even in Advaita tradition, Shankara, in his commentaries, he criticizes everyone else. In fact, Shankara spends a lot of time criticizing the Buddhists. Shankara spends a lot of time criticizing other schools of thought like Vaisheshikas and Sankhyas. So it's common for a teacher to criticize other schools of thought for the sake of establishing their own school of thought. And that's what Srila Prabhupada does. Then, next question from Santosh. Santosh speaks of a problem at home. Santosh is very devoted to these teachings of Vedanta. He says, presently I spend 1.5 hours in meditation and around 3 hours listening to Vedanta talks or bhajans. That's good, right? Excellent. But watch. I live with my wife and children. She also does meditation, but she gets slightly perturbed by seeing me dedicate all of my time to these spiritual practices. But now I don't like to do anything else, like go to malls or movies, etc. So there's a division growing between Santosh and his wife. Is he following Dharma or is he not following Dharma? Would be a question to ask. He's deeply involved in his sadhana, and one observation I would make is that if he is fulfilling all of his responsibilities as a husband and father, no problem. If he is fulfilling all of his responsibilities at home as a husband and father, there's no problem. Wife may not like it, but wife has her own concerns, her own interests. She has her own personality, her own agenda. But if Santosh indeed is fulfilling all of his responsibilities at home while simultaneously devoting so much effort to sadhana, there is no problem whatsoever. But that's not always what happens. Sometimes when you get drawn so deeply into anything, even Advaita Vedanta, you might neglect some of your responsibilities at home. And if Santosh indeed is developing, ignoring any of his responsibilities at home, that's the problem. And that's what karma yoga is all about. So Sri Krishna devotes almost a half of at least a third of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna devotes to karma yoga. And Sri Krishna teaches you how sadhana doesn't only mean studying Vedanta, meditation, and listening to bhajans. Sadhana can also mean helping your wife do the dishes. With the teachings of karma yoga, helping your wife do the dishes becomes a kind of sadhana, and that might be the solution if there's a problem between husband and wife in this situation. Next question. From Shaku, who lives in Texas. What is the relevance of Hindu rituals after a person's death? Is it helpful for the survivor's healing, or do they serve as offerings or prayers so that the person who died has a better afterlife or next life? The answer is yes, both. So traditionally, these rituals, in one of the common rituals, they call pinda dana. Some pinda, a ball of rice, is offered for the sake of the departed souls, and there's some complicated mythology that goes along with it, and that is that you put these when the rituals are over, these pindas are left outside so that the birds can eat them, and the birds fly up into the skies and metaphorically transport your offerings to the departed souls. So on a surface level, these rituals are meant to bless the departed ones on their journeys to their following lives. This is the surface meaning of these rituals. Antyeshti is a general term for the rituals performed at the time of someone's death. But she asks also, is it helpful for the healing of survivors? Absolutely. In fact, I would even argue it's more important for the survivors. If someone were to fail to do all these rituals for the departed souls, I think it would have little, possibly no effect on their welfare as they go on to the next life. They are being carried by the laws of karma. Laws of karma are Ishvara's intelligence. So they're being cared for. The departed souls are cared for. If you do something additional for them, nice. But what I'm saying is, what's more important is not to help the departed souls, but to help those who are left behind and suffering badly, suffering great loss. To heal that loss requires lots and lots of support. That support can come in many, many different ways. The support of friends and family members. But having the kind of support you get when you gather people together and perform these rituals, that is very healing, very supportive, very helpful. So for Shaku's question, the answer is both. These rituals will bless you. First and foremost, they bless you. Secondarily, they may bless the departed souls, even though those departed souls they don't depend, let's put it like that. They don't depend on your offerings. It's not like if you didn't do the rituals, they would get in trouble. That's a wrong concept. I know some scriptures make such statements. I won't get into why. Anyway, we'll just leave it there. All right. Actually, I can't just say something and drop it. So here's the thing. There are statements made like, if you don't do this ritual, your ancestors, 3 generations of ancestors will fall into hell. You find statements like that. If you fail to do these rituals, 3 generations of ancestors will get cursed. Who makes those statements? Priests who make a living from doing these rituals. So these priests have a vested interest in convincing you to do these rituals so that they can make a living. Anyway, this is not to justify it at all, but just to mention it happens. Sadly, it happens a lot. Anyway, just be forewarned. All right, next this is from Jayant, who lives in Raipur. Jayant asks, as per the scriptures, anything that is created will get destroyed. Correct. Is it possible to prove this argument? Anything created gets destroyed. There is some logic. Here's the logic. Anything created gets destroyed. To be created, and this is a logical question, so the answer is pure logic. So excuse me in advance if you don't like logic. There's only one way to answer this question, and it's with pure logic. And the question is, anything created will get destroyed. How to prove that anything created gets destroyed? To be created is a change of state. There was a state of previous non-existence followed by a state of existence. There's prag-abhava is the Sanskrit terminology. Prior non-existence is a state that precedes bhava, existence. So the fact that something is created demonstrates that it is subject to change of state. That which is created was previously in a non-existent state. Anything that is created has states. If it has the state of being created, there's another state it also has, and that is the state of being destroyed. So the argument is really not about being destroyed. The argument is anything created has states, and one possible state is the state of destruction. Logic. Pure logic. This question is from Payal, who lives somewhere in India. What is the difference between ego and reflected consciousness? Ego, ahankara, reflected consciousness. The problem is these terms need to be understood properly. Ego means what? We're not talking about pride here. And reflected consciousness means what? So instead of using these kind of technical terms, ego is the feeling of individuality. Right now, as you're watching this video, you feel like an individual person watching this video. You don't feel like you do in deep sleep, where you don't feel like an individual. So right now, this feeling of individuality is present. That is ego, ahankara. What is reflected consciousness? That's a technical term. Chidabhasa and other Sanskrit terms are used. Pratibimba Chaitanya, these are technical terms that all end up meaning very simply experience. Whatever you experience is a result of consciousness being manifest in your mind. Consciousness manifest in your mind can be called Chidabhasa, can be called Pratibimba Chaitanya, can be called reflected consciousness. So now, redefining these terms, what's the difference between the feeling of individuality and experience? That becomes now easy. You experience the feeling of individuality. Experience is fundamental, and experience of individuality comes and goes in your experience. Right now you experience it. Tonight in deep sleep you won't experience it. So a problem with words like these and terms like these is we need to understand them properly. And usually understanding comes in context, which makes it a little tricky here because in the satsang we don't really set up the context, but I think you understand. It would be better, however, to explain these words in a particular context, but Pyle doesn't mention context here. Next question is from Michael. It doesn't say where Michael lives. Michael says, you often talk about Vedanta being a methodology, not mere information, and not even a philosophy. I'm glad Michael is paying attention. That's a very important teaching. And I said recently that the point of Vedanta isn't to know Brahman, but to be free from suffering. Not to gain information about Brahman. The goal of Vedanta is to be free from suffering. That made me wonder if Brahman is just a tool, a teaching device, used as part of the methodology to free us all from suffering, or is Brahman the absolute truth? And here's the issue. Are statements like, everything is Brahman, sarvam kalvidam brahma, comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. Is that statement the actual truth, or is that statement just part of a methodology to remove suffering? Michael's question is a little complex, so just to make sure we understand. That statement we find in the Upanishad, sarvam kalvidam brahma, is that statement truth? Or is that statement just part of a methodology meant to free us from suffering? Let me say that one more time because it's a little subtle. When the Veda says everything is Brahman, is that statement itself truth with a capital T? Or is that statement part of a larger picture, a methodology meant to lead us to freedom from suffering? Well, first of all, there's a big difference between the statement, everything is Brahman, and Brahman. Brahman is truth with a capital T. The statement, sarvam kalvidam brahma, is words. And words are not truth. Brahman is a reality. Words are not a reality, even when the words say sarvam kalvidam brahma, even when the words say tattvamasi. Tattvamasi is not a truth with a capital T. Tattvamasi is a sentence that points you towards the truth of yourself. The truth we're seeking is not words. And the truth we're seeking, enough said. The truth we're seeking is not in the form of words, language, no matter how profound those revelations might be. So yes, the Veda says, the Chandogya Upanishad says, sarvam kalvidam brahma. All that exists is Brahman alone. Those words are words. Brahman is truth. Words are words, and words are part of a teaching methodology. So words, the common expression used mostly by commentators is that these words are lakshana. Lakshana means that which indicates. They're like pointers, which makes you think of the common expression when you're pointing at the moon. The whole point is not the finger pointing. It's the moon. The moon is the reality, and the finger is merely a pointer. So all scriptural words are pointers. They are lakshana. They're not an absolute truth. Absolute truth is here. All right. Next question from Jay. Oh, making good progress. This is from Jay. Jay lives in Watertown, Massachusetts. And Jay says, oh, this is a very complex question. But it's a good question. How can Atma enliven the mind? According to Vedanta, the mind is jada, it's stuff. Body is physical stuff, mind is non-physical stuff. So how does that non-physical stuff called mind, how does it become sentient? How can Atma, which is a higher reality, interact with the mind? That's really profound. It's a question that professional philosophers struggle with, that kind of question, and Vedantins also. The idea is that which is in a higher level of reality has no connection to a lower level of reality, just like the example I've given so many times. If you're dreaming, and in your dream you're thirsty, you have a glass of water on your night table, but that glass of water on your night table is inaccessible to you in your dream. The water on your night table is more real than your dream thirst. Therefore, it has no interaction. It can't solve your dream thirst. In the same way, and this is really quite a good question, thoughtful question. And the issue here is that consciousness is more real than mind. Just like the water on a night table is more real than the dream, in a similar way, consciousness is more real than mind. To answer Michael's question, allow me not to explain that statement. It's a big Vedantic statement. Michael understands it and assumes it, and I think for the sake of brevity, I won't explain it further, but the metaphor stands. Like water on the table is more real than a dream, therefore no interaction. In the same way, consciousness is more real than mind, therefore no interaction. That's really a good argument. And it takes a lot of Vedanta to deal with this. In Western philosophy, they actually get stuck on this one quite a bit. We won't get stuck, but it'll take a little effort to answer. So, how can Atma enliven something from a different order of reality? Excellent. Okay. So, the answer is, really speaking, there's no interaction because there's no separation. You have interaction where you have two things. So you've got one glass of water on a night table, and then there's the dream world. These are separate realities, right? Water on a table and dream world, separate realities. But now let's talk about consciousness and mind. Are they really two different realities? If you look at mind from the standpoint of being jada, inert, yes, it is a lower state of reality. But that's not what you experience. Let me explain. That needs to be explained. Right now, are you experiencing a mind? This is true. I've never used this before. See if this works. Right now, do you experience mind or do you experience thoughts? Now, what's the difference? Mind, as Michael pointed out, is made of inert, subtle elements. Thoughts are quite different. Thoughts are what you experience. So right now, are you experiencing inert, subtle elements, or are you experiencing thoughts? You're experiencing thoughts, right? The fact is that those thoughts are related to that mind, but from our perspective of experience, let's put it like this. From the perspective of the world, this will help. From the perspective of the world, mind is stuff. Absolutely. Jada. Inert stuff. Inert, non-physical stuff from the standpoint of the world. But here we're talking about from the standpoint of experience. Very different perspective. From the perspective of your experience, your personal experience, you experience thoughts, not inert, subtle stuff. So, in your experience right now is not mind. In your experience right now are thoughts. You correctly said, Michael correctly said, there can be no interaction between consciousness, which is a higher reality, and inert material stuff, which is a lower reality. Fine. That's from the level of paramarthika satta, absolute reality, and vyavaharika satta, worldly reality. If you don't know these terms, just ignore it. But now look, we've shifted our perspective. We're not talking about the relationship between consciousness and world, mind. Mind as inert stuff is part of the world. But we're shifting our perspective to the relationship between consciousness and thoughts. Again, not the same. Relationship between consciousness and mind is one thing. Mind belongs to the world. But relationship between consciousness and thoughts is a very different relationship, because thoughts are not part of the world. This is part of the world. This is part of the world. Thoughts are what? What is a thought? A thought is a form of consciousness. Just like a wave is water with a form, in the same way, thought is consciousness with a form. And what is the difference then between wave and water? It's one and the same thing. Wave is water. What is the difference between consciousness and thought? Thought is consciousness. Thought with some form added onto it is that thought is nothing. The content, and that's here a better expression, the content of a wave is water. The content of every thought is consciousness. So we said things interact when they're different. So the water on the nightstand is separate and different from the dream world. But here, consciousness and thought are not two different things. They're two aspects of one and the same thing. Consciousness can be with form, consciousness can be without form. Consciousness with form is thought. Consciousness without form is Atma, your true self. So let's make sure we've explained this. How can Atma enliven the mind? Atma doesn't enliven the mind. The mind remains jada, but thoughts occur. Of course, the thoughts occur because of mind. If there's no mind, there's no thoughts. So maybe this expression that consciousness enlivens the mind, we have to take it kind of metaphorically. Doesn't exactly enliven the mind, but it does cause thoughts to emerge from the mind. I guess you can call it enlivening. But in that process of enlivening, please note, the mind does not consciousness does not truly interact with the mind. Consciousness produces thoughts. And this, by the way, is one of the in the tradition of commentaries following Shankaracharya, this ends up, there are sub-commentaries and more commentaries and more commentaries. This is the kind of topic that they love to talk about and argue about, and they come up with different ways of explaining. Anyway, the point I'm suggesting here as we finish up with this question is that it's an exceedingly subtle and complex issue. I've explained it very briefly, and I hope that's enough. It deserves a lot more explanation. How are we doing with time? A few more questions. This question comes from Mickey, who lives in Australia. Mickey says, there seems to be either a manifest state, waking and dream, or an unmanifest state, deep sleep and death. Correct. Brahman is present in all these states, and yet is none of them, in the sense that clay is present in the pot, but clay is not a pot. Right? This is the idea. Brahman is a reality because of which everything exists, just like clay is a reality because of which this pot exists. So Brahman is present in these states, yet is none of them. Can Brahman be known without any upadhi being present? Upadhi means form. Can clay be known without any form whatsoever? Please show me clay which is not in any form. Huh? Got a problem, right? Clay will have one form or another, even if it's a lump, even if it's dust, even if it's shards. Clay exists. In the world, clay exists with form. Brahman exists with the universe. Brahman is manifest as the universe. I'm wanting to know if the upadhi can cease to be, so that pure nirguna Brahman alone remains. Pure nirguna Brahman alone never remained, never existed. Because nirguna Brahman is coexistent, sorry for complicated words, along with nirguna Brahman is saguna Brahman. Saguna Brahman means Ishvara, creator, sustainer, destroyer of the entire universe. You can't have one without the other. You can't have nirguna Brahman without saguna Brahman. You can't have saguna Brahman without nirguna Brahman, which means nirguna Brahman is necessarily, I can't say accompanied, but the existence of nirguna Brahman cannot be separated from saguna Brahman. Or to answer Mickey's question more exactly, nirguna Brahman cannot be separated from the world, upadhis, forms. Just like, so how would you, I've never thought about this before, try this. How would you separate clay and pot? Go into a chemistry lab and try to design some kind of experiment in which you're going to separate clay from this pot. They're inseparable. In the same way, Brahman, nirguna Brahman, can't be, what is the word they use in the science classes? Distilled. You can't somehow separate or distill Brahman. Brahman should precipitate out of the solution. Remember your chemistry class days. Okay. Cody asks a question. Cody asks, can we ask God for material things such as well-being, wealth, money, success, good health, etc.? Can we ask? Yes. Why not? But is that the best thing to ask for? I haven't told this story for a long time, so allow me to tell you. There was a beggar in India, a saintly beggar, but he wasn't very smart. And they called him Manda Baba. Baba means saintly person, but he was Manda, he was slow-witted. And Manda Baba used to sustain himself by begging. And every beggar has a trick. If you're in India, you learn this very quickly. Every beggar has their own technique. And the technique of Manda Baba was to ask every person for 1 paisa. A paisa, I think, was 1/16th of a rupee, I think. I don't know. This is before my time in India. Anyway, he asked for 1 penny. We'll just say 1 penny. Oh, anna is 1/16th. Yeah, so paisa is tenth?
Paisa is
100th.
Yeah, like a cent.
Like a cent. Okay, paisa is we'll just say 1 cent. Yeah, paisas are used today. Anna I was thinking about before. So he'd ask every person for 1 paisa, 1 penny, right? 1/100th of a rupee. So ask everyone. And his idea was no one would refuse him if he's only asking for a penny. And if he asked enough people for 1 penny, he'd get enough money to sustain himself. So that's what he did. He asked everyone for 1 penny, 1 paisa. And then one day he learned that the local Raja, the local king, was coming to his village, and this king was known for his generosity. And Manda Baba said, hey, I can get some more money. So the king comes to the village. Manda Baba comes up to this generous king, and he says, hey, Maharaj, kripaya ek paisa dijiye. Please give me 1 penny. Now this king could have given him bags of gold. But Manda Baba was conditioned to only ask for 1 penny. This is kind of a silly story, but it makes a good point. When you're praying to the God of the cosmos, the God of the universe. What should you pray for? That's worth thinking about. It's definitely worth thinking about. One thing we know for sure is that you can pray to know God better. What better prayer could there be? Oh God, hey Ishvara, please help me know who you truly are. Because generally when we pray, we don't really know clearly. Of course, we have some image, some concept, or maybe we're standing in front of some deity on a temple altar. But to know who Ishvara truly is and to have that personal relationship with Ishvara, to pray for that relationship is perhaps one of the highest prayers. Other prayers as well. Point is, there's nothing wrong in Manda Baba asking the king for 1 paisa. Nothing wrong in asking Ishvara for whatever it is you need. But we can do better than that. Okay, a couple more questions and we'll conclude. This is, where are the dates here? 15th. Yeah, I think we're done with the recent questions. These are questions that actually came last week. How does the enlightened this is a question from Amit, who lives in India. He asks, how does an enlightened person break the cycle of birth and death? And it's more complicated than you think, because Amit understands that a person might still have lifetimes ahead because of his sanchita karmas, which are infinite in number, and because of deep-rooted samskaras, or what's often called vasanas, impressions in one's mind. So how can you possibly become enlightened when you have all these impressions in your mind? Let's say deficiencies in your mind, and when you have all these karmas. And the answer to that, infinite karmas, how do you become free from all of that? You become free from it by giving up ownership of it all. If you are really the doer of actions, you own an infinite amount of karma. Suppose you discover that you are Satchidananda Atma that doesn't do anything at all, never did anything at all. That discovery of your true nature as a non-agent of action, that discovery allows you to give up your ownership of the karma. And similarly for these samskaras or vasanas. Samskaras and vasanas belong to your mind. But if you recognize that your true nature is pure consciousness, separate and independent of your mind, then you break free from those samskaras and vasanas. They belong to your mind. Karmas are incurred through your body and mind, doing actions. Samskaras and vasanas belong to your mind. But when you discover, and discover implies knowledge, spiritual knowledge, knowledge of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. With that knowledge, you become free from that cycle of birth and rebirth. I think we'll take just one more question. I think that'll be enough for today. This question comes from Arun, also in Bangalore. And Arun asks, we've heard so much about near-death experiences, out-of-the-body experiences. Dr. Raymond Moody is a pioneer in the field. All of his books are out there. In the absence of any brain activity in near-death patients who have been revived, they narrate their experiences. Okay, the experience of somebody who's dying. Experiences include hovering over their bodies, being witnesses to what's happening around there. How does one understand such experiences? Okay, I think there's a wrong conclusion here. In the absence of brain activity, as a person is dying, it's not that your brain clicks from on to off, right? It's a gradual process. Brain functions, I think the brain gets deprived of oxygen, and the functions of the brain gradually fall off. And in that process, so when a person is dying, it's not that their brain is not functioning, nor is their brain working normally, but someplace in between normal function and no function. That's a condition of the brain when somebody is dying, and those are the people who have near-death experiences. The experiences take place in that window as the brain is decaying. When the brain is dead, experience comes to an end. There's no more experience. When you take that brain with the body it's put inside and you put it into an oven and cremate it, obviously there's going to be no more experience. I think it's reasonable to assume that, and I think there's plenty of science to back this up, that experience ends with the end of brain activity. But we have this window. As you're dying, the brain, by the way, your heart could be stopped, right? Suppose your heart has stopped, there's no pulse, there's no blood pressure, and you're still, how weird. Suppose suddenly, just for fun, by the way, this is our last question, so we'll have a little fun with this one. Suppose as I'm sitting here, my heart just stopped and my blood pressure went to 0. For at least a few seconds, I'd still be able to think, oh my God, what is happening? Would be my thought. Of course, probably just for a few seconds, and then I'll be unconscious. But there'd be a little window of experience, consciousness, but then as my circulation stops, the amount of oxygen in my brain is going to fall off very quickly. As that brain oxygen falls off, I'm going to go from a position of normal experience to 0 experience. There's a range. And I would suggest that near-death experiences happen in that range as the brain is dying. So normal experience at the beginning, no experience at the end, a variety of experiences in between, and sometimes these patients are revived, even revived when there's no experience. So the brain can be completely deprived of oxygen. If it's not deprived for too long, then the brain can get restarted, so to speak. Cells start dying, I think, in the absence of oxygen, but there's some time before those cells start dying. So near-death experiences would happen while the brain is losing its functionality, which means anyone who comes back to life after a near-death experience is reporting on what they experienced as the brain was losing its function. Now my question is, or my point I should say is this: how reliable will those reports be when your brain is only partially functional? Even when your brain is fully functional, it makes mistakes. We know that very well. So when your brain is losing its functionality, you can have a variety of experiences, but how reliable will your report be of experiences that take place in a partially functional brain? So I'm not denying the existence of any of these experiences. I mean, people come back and they report on these experiences. But what I would ask is, how reliable are their reports? And should those reports be taken seriously? You know, there are people who come back and say, I went to heaven. There are people, and I met Jesus. Or there are people who say, I went to hell. It's a nasty place. So I don't doubt that they've had those experiences. But my question is, based on what we just discussed, are their reports trustworthy? And that's something to think about. This is a great place to conclude our satsang. Thank you for attending. You can send me your questions. Make sure you put satsang question in the subject line. That way it'll come right here, and I don't have to go looking for them. All right, we'll conclude with the prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next time. Very good. All right, nice to have you attend. And I apologize, I don't really like being so impersonal with those of you here, but you get the idea. It makes a huge difference when I'm looking into the camera. So we're doing this quite deliberately. Thanks for your patience. And if you want personal attention, as I said, come join us at 6 p.m. Thanks for coming. Namaste. Om Parameshvara.